Vocês sabiam que o Dia dos Namorados, ou o Valentine's Day, nos Estados Unidos e também em outros países é comemorado agora dia 14 de fevereiro? E pensando nessa data, o CAMBLY está com uma super oferta especial. Para você ganhar 50% de desconto em todos os planos anuais do CAMBLY e do CAMBLY Kids, é só você usar o nosso super cupom, que é Amo Inglês. Gente, super fácil, muito maravilhoso. Então, vocês podem presentear quem você ama, um namorado, um amigo, um familiar. Não precisa ser, né, uma coisa romântica. Pode ser só porque você quer que essa pessoa fique com aulas incríveis de inglês, tá bom? Então, o CAMBLY é o match perfeito entre você e o inglês. Corre lá, que é só até o dia 17 de fevereiro, tá bom? Now, on with the show.
Hello, hello, hey, sweet people. Welcome to another episode of Inglês no Rádio. Today I am not here with Alexia, actually. Alexia is still recovering from her second dose of the vaccination. And I'm here with Jackie from Ask Jackie, which is a huge honor and quite the surprise. So Jackie, welcome. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. This is really fun. So thank you guys for inviting me.
It is our pleasure. So, Jackie, I imagine most people that listen to our podcast probably are already aware of your work and what you do. Just in the English learning Brazilian world, I think you're quite famous. But for maybe those few people that don't, can you give us a quick overview of who you are, what you do?
Of course. Yeah. It's so funny because the internet is one of those things that we do everything kind of on our own and we don't really realize how many people do watch our videos or listen to our podcasts and things like that. But I'm sure there are lots of people who do not know who I am. So I'm happy to do an introduction. I moved to Brazil in 2009 on kind of a whim, looking for adventure, existential crisis type of thing. I ended up staying for 10 years, having 2 children, getting married, opening a school, starting an online business, and most importantly, just really falling in love with the language and the culture and in teaching English to the Brazilians and helping them achieve their personal dreams, professional goals, because English is something that truly transforms lives. Like people can have all these degrees and many, many years of experience, but without English, they have so many doors closed to them. So if we can help them learn the language, and learning a language is really difficult. It's not easy to learn a foreign language, but if we can somehow make it a little bit easier by simplifying those difficult things and making the process a little bit more enjoyable, it's a big gift that we can give people, and it's really fulfilling for us as teachers as well. So yeah, now I work completely online. I have an online course, a YouTube channel, Instagram account, Facebook, Telegram. It's like whatever social media appears, we feel like we have to be
You're
there.
everywhere.
Telegram. I'm not on TikTok.
Don't get me started. Alexia is trying to convince me.
We have to have some limits, but yeah, it's crazy how the internet can. We now have students and people who learn from us all over the world, and I learn from people that live all over the world that I've never met personally. I work with people that I've never met in person. So it's pretty amazing what the internet has done for us.
It's insane. Our only full-time employee, Felipe, who's been on the show, we talk about him a lot. I talk to him almost every day, would consider him one of my really close friends. We've still never met in person.
Yeah.
And it's just insane.
Yeah, our editor, who has edited all of our course videos, like 95% of the videos on my channel and everything. We've never met in person either. It's just all over WhatsApp and Skype and other things like that. It's pretty amazing.
It's amazing. It has its pros and cons, and I'm sure we can get into that. Can I ask you one quick question about your background?
Of course, yeah.
So you went to Brazil in 2009, existential crisis. I know the feeling, did the same thing just 5 years later. And were you already teaching at that point?
Yes. So I have my undergrad degree, my bachelor's degree. This is really important vocabulary for everybody listening, in Spanish, actually, and secondary education, which basically means secondary education means I was certified to teach middle school and high school. So that's from 6th grade through 12th grade. Primary education would be elementary school. And I always loved languages, like the Spanish language. I did a semester abroad in Spain when I was in college, and I really loved learning it. I loved the culture. I don't know, it was kind of like an escape in some ways. You kind of go to this fantasy land, and it was for me, I found it very therapeutic, which I know a lot of people are going to be like, oh my God, learning a language is the opposite. I need therapy in order to get through these classes. But for me, I found it very therapeutic in a lot of ways. It was like an escape from reality to this like amazing foreign land where everything is completely different from where you live. And I taught at an all-girls Catholic school for a year. I taught in Chicago public schools. I then went on to get my master's degree in school counseling, and I worked as a school counselor at Lincoln Park High School in Chicago. And that was kind of when the existential crisis hit. I remember looking around, and I was the youngest person in my department. And it was kind of like I spent my whole life following the plan, working to get to that job. And then I was there, and I just saw a lot of people around me counting down the years to retirement. And I found myself counting down the days for the weekend, counting down the months for vacation, counting down the years to retirement, and I was in my 20s at that time. And I'm like, I'm wishing my life away in order to start living. And I had a great life. I have great friends and family, and it was a really good job. But I just felt like it wasn't where I wanted to be. And I remember one night specifically, I was laying in my bed, and I lived on the 53rd floor of a Chicago high rise. A lot of people, Chicago has those like really, really tall buildings. And my unit was on the 53rd floor, and I was just laying there thinking, when I'm 80 plus years old, if I make it that long, hopefully, if I, am 80 something years old, what will I regret more? Staying in this position and doing what is really comfortable and safe, secure, all those things that we kind of want. But then when we get it, we're like, oh, I feel trapped. I can't get out now. Or,
right.
Taking a risk and doing something kind of crazy. But at the time I was single. I didn't have any responsibilities other than myself. If it was a tremendous mistake and a terrible idea, no one else would be hurt by it except for me. And it was like so obvious to me that I needed to leave that job. And I wanted to go to South America. I wanted to spend time, and I honestly thought I would go to a Spanish-speaking country because that was the language that I could communicate in. But no, I had to make it difficult. But a friend of mine, she had been to Brazil before, and she's like, oh, let's go to Brazil. So we went to Brazil just to visit. During Carnival, we went to Rio, we went to Sao Paulo, went to Marizias, and I just completely fell in love with it. And I started taking some Portuguese classes, and I loved my teacher, the classes, the group of people that were there, because it's just like such a random group of people. Like Chicago does not have a big Brazilian community at all. Like I live in Orlando now, everybody's Brazilian. But Chicago, I had never met a single person from Brazil my entire life living there until I started taking Portuguese classes. And it's just these really cool people that I had absolutely nothing in common with, except for we all loved Brazil and we wanted to learn the language. And even when I went to Brazil, I didn't intend on staying as long as I did. I thought I would go for maybe 6 months or a year, get it out of my system, whatever it was that was in my system. And then I would come back. And I did come back about 7 months later, and I discovered I was pregnant, which was like a whole other crazy story. But it was all worked out. I really think in a lot of ways it was what I needed. It was, I felt almost relieved in some crazy way, because I had to focus like what's best for the baby right now. And it wasn't all these options like, oh, maybe I'll go here, maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do that, like floating around, which makes you completely dissatisfied with whatever you are doing, because there's all these amazing other options that are hanging around. It was focused on, okay, we're going to have a baby. We're going to do the best we can with the situation. And we did. And thank God it all worked out. It was a heck of a challenge. But I grew so much. And I know if I hadn't gone through that, I would not be like who I am today. So I'm really grateful for it. And I'm also grateful that, my husband and I were still together. We have another child too. And there are lots and lots of ups and downs, just like any endeavor in life, but it all worked out. So yeah, that was a lot more than what you asked before.
No, wow, that's a beautiful story.
Yeah.
I don't remember my original question.
I think you were asking me about my teaching degree.
If you ask Jackie a question, you're going to get an answer.
You're going to get a lot more than you asked for.
No, that's a beautiful story. You said a few things that I'm very curious about. On one hand, I can really resonate with your story that being in a job in the U.S. and it's like, okay, am I just wait around until I die here? What happens? So when I have most of our students are learning English for professional opportunities and career growth. And they really want to take the jump of leaving Brazil and getting a job in Germany or something like that. And I find a lot of students are like, I could not be as brave or as courageous as you, Foster. You left your country and you started a podcast. And I want to say, it was not brave. It was desperation at the time. I don't know if that resonates with you at all.
Absolutely. I think in my situation, when I first came to Brazil, it wasn't complete desperation, but I still knew I could always go back. So it was kind of like, well, why not? Try it out. But, when we had a baby and when we were really struggling financially and when we decided, let's try to make some more money by opening a school and opening groups. I was teaching privately, which was great. But then you begin to think we just were not able to save money, at all. It was really, really tight. So then you are forced to think of ways in which you can hopefully make a little bit more by multiplying your efforts by, teaching in groups or hiring other people or moving to an online space where you can reach more people. And that was a big challenge because I had never really thought like that before. I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. I was a teacher, and I loved being a teacher. And I always wanted to be a mom, so that was perfect. And I love being a mom more than anything. But I never was like super ambitious and driven to have my company. Or that just is not it today. That still is not my personality. But when you have nothing to lose, like we literally were in a desperate situation. If it all went wrong, okay, we weren't going to lose anything because we didn't have anything. And once you get to that position, it's a lot easier to take risks. Now that we actually have something to lose, it is harder. We have children,
For sure.
We have assets, we have a reputation, a company. It's almost more difficult when you have something to lose versus when you're like, well, I'm at the bottom of the barrel right now. The only way is up, hopefully.
Yeah, or in your case, south.
South, exactly. So I think when people say they don't have the courage, maybe they just aren't in that desperate of a situation, or maybe they just have too much to risk. And I think that's okay too, because it is very, very risky. It's incredibly risky. And I talk to people all the time that are trying to get into this online space. Just the other day, I was talking to a friend, and I
would probably not recommend it most of the time.
It's something that you have to want so badly that you're willing to do it for many years and not make anything. Actually, you're probably going to spend those first couple of years. So I think it's always good to start off as like a side job. Keep your regular job and start doing something on the side. And usually it turns out to be something really big when it's something that you're really passionate about. But I have friends who are trying to teach English online or do things, and they're saying, I make more working at Burger King, than I do. I make more in Burger King in 1 month than I do trying to teach online in a full year. And that's real, because
that's
hard.
crazy.
Yeah, it's hard.
I was going to ask if you would still recommend like traditional teachers that want to transition online or have had to transition online because of the pandemic. I also started out as like a private teacher running around Rio de Janeiro trying to teach people, but pretty quickly moved online. And maybe 10 years ago, like it wasn't good money, but you could make money doing it.
Right.
I think nowadays it would be very, very difficult.
Yeah, it's hard. I think if you're really good, there will always be a market for you. So I think that's something that people have to really invest in themselves so that they stand out amongst the rest. I think if you're a very good teacher, there will never be a shortage of students for you in general. And you can charge more for your hourly rates because the students feel that it's worth their investment. But the competition is tougher and tougher and tougher every single year. And there's all these platforms where people pay next to nothing, and the price is driven way down. And with private teaching, what's hard is students are flaky sometimes, they cancel a lot, and it's not, they can start and stop. So it's not like a secure source of income. But I personally think if you can do some type of like well-organized recorded content that you can either use as material for your students to study from while you're not teaching them, some way to not have to give up all your time over and over and over again, that's definitely very helpful. Like I buy online courses. I sell my online course. Like I find them to be really helpful, really, really helpful if they're done well. I think the hard part is figuring out how to do it, because technology is something that is changing constantly. And I mean, I didn't know the first thing about recording or editing or even building a social media presence, there's a lot that's involved in it, and it doesn't happen quickly. So I think most people start out with this idea like, oh, I'm going to record these videos and in a month I'm going to have 1 million subscribers and 6 figures in my bank. And it doesn't work out that way. It's you got to learn how to do it, and you have to do it in a way that's maybe different and ideally better than what the competition is doing. And that's tough. It's not easy.
It's not easy. I think something...
Yeah, so I'd say...
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to... Whoever wants to know, like, oh, should I transition to the online world? I would ask yourself those questions. Like, well, what can you do? Like, if you are watching other videos or, seeing other courses and you feel like, I can do this, but even better, then my answer would be yes, find a way. But if you're watching and you're trying to think of a way to copy what they're doing, or if you're going to like look at other people's videos and just regurgitate that same information in your own videos, then I would say no, because there's a lot of copies out there and the copies don't do very well. It's the original ones that do better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you pointed out that not only do you need to be passionate about it, but it's going to take a really long time. Like, I think we're getting really close to episode number 1000. Like, you're going to have to produce content for like 5 years, probably.
Yeah. And you have to be willing to do that. Like, yeah, it's a long-term commitment, and consistency is everything. And so when we start out, we're like extremely excited, like all these ideas and motivation through the roof, like, yeah. And then it just takes a nosedive. And then it's like, oh, I have to, for me, it's my, producing content all the time. It's really exhausting sometimes. And sometimes I have great ideas and I'm super into it. And other times I'm just cranking it out because I know that's the commitment I made to myself and to the subscribers and the people that are on my channel. But you have to have a lot of consistency and discipline to keep it up, and not this like up and down thing.
Yeah. And that's not like an innate capacity that all humans have. It's something you have to cultivate. Right. And that's something I noticed. I don't know if I saw this on your Instagram or in a video or something, but I noticed you mentioned like how important it is to enjoy the process.
Yes.
In this case, in the context of learning a new language. And if I'm not mistaken, you're also a fan of Stoicism. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a fan of like everything that's like self-help, spiritual growth, self-awareness, emotional intelligence, like that to me, like if anyone's like, what books are you reading? I'm like, okay, here, I can show you like all the books I have here. So that's A Course in Miracles, Atomic Habits, like.
Oh, Atomic Habits was a solid book.
5-minute journal. Yeah. I've got like, to me, there's nothing more interesting than like learning about ourselves and the human mind and spirit and our own potential. But I know for some people that's like totally not interesting. So, but it's really helpful. I find it really helpful.
Yeah, me too. I mean, yeah. If you look at my Kindle, it's
everything
very hard on the self-help, personal development section.
Yeah.
So maybe just to pivot a little bit, but hopefully this is not too strange of a segue. After I've been teaching for more than a decade now, I'm really beginning to believe that like what makes a successful student and what makes someone just kind of fall off after a couple months or a couple years, it has nothing to do with like the language or like the grammar or the tips. And it has a lot more to do with the psychology and the discipline and consistency. And that stuff is hard to teach. And I don't know what your
Yes.
opinions are about that. But I'm imagining like, should our English courses also come with like a course on like habit formation or something like that?
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree with you, first of all. And I even try to tell people it all starts, in your mind. Throughout my course, I repeatedly remind people like what you believe is what you achieve. And we have to really be careful with our beliefs, and not only our beliefs, but like our habits, our thoughts, the words we use, and everything. It's not just like, people want to know exactly how much time they have to invest in order to become fluent or to get the results they want.
Yeah.
I'm like, it is
The most common question I
to
receive.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, there's no magical number of minutes or hours or months or years that's going to make you fluent. It's what you do with that time. You can have English playing in your house all day long, but if you're not paying any attention to it, it's a complete waste of time. Or if you're sitting in the classroom, but you're on your phone checking out Instagram, again, another waste of time. Or if you're studying for 5 minutes, but you're insanely focused and you're really interested in it, and then you take that and you review it and you apply it and you enjoy it, that is going to be a lot more beneficial than something else. But people have to really work on their mindset a lot and really visualize. Like, I'm a big believer in visualization. I do this with myself with everything. Like in the morning, like as I lay in bed, like even before I get up and start doing things, I really try to just visualize myself. And it's not necessarily anything specific, but just in what I want, like be the light to other people, brighten people's days, productive, whatever it is that you're working on. I think that's so, so powerful. We have to see ourselves in our minds in a successful situation. And then things happen more naturally. Most people do the opposite. They imagine themselves, giving a presentation in English and going blank and everyone laughing at them, or they imagine themselves going into an interview and sweating profusely and not getting the job, or whatever it is. And that also has a negative effect on you. So I think, like you mentioned, the students that believe in themselves, they have enough self-confidence and self-esteem that the little frustrations, the little pitfalls that doesn't completely take them down, they just laugh it off. Okay, that's cool. They move on. It doesn't affect them like some other students. They also enjoy the process so much more, which is key. You're not going to enjoy it all the time. Like, that's unrealistic. You don't enjoy anything all the time. But I think if you enjoy it at least more than 50% of the time and you feel good about what you're doing, you're definitely more likely to succeed. But the mental component is huge. And as teachers, it is a lot, because sometimes people put 100% of the responsibility on the teacher, whereas the teacher has like maybe 30%, in my opinion, or possibly even less. Like the student is really the one who, even if the teacher creates the most magnificent course or book or whatever in the world, like the student is the person who's responsible for studying it, applying it, enjoying it, and practicing it. And we're kind of like guides. We give them the information, we hope and pray that they watch it, study it, practice it. We encourage them. We try to motivate them, but they have to understand, I get messages all the time. Oh, I'm so frustrated. I'm not motivated. I'm like, no one is motivated all the time. Don't give that so much power, like just do it. And I'm not motivated to do 99% of the stuff that I have to do. Like, who's motivated to wash the dishes? Like, no one. But you just do it without overthinking it. And then you feel better when you're done. But it is hard. It's so mental. It's so incredibly mental. And I think you're right. A lot of people don't give that the attention that it deserves.
Yeah. I think the idea of enjoying the process is immensely important, but it has to be understood like every minute is not going to be fun. Like a huge part of learning a language is quite boring, just like learning any new skill. But the the process of, okay, at the end of the day, you studied, you are working towards a goal, that is enjoyable. Like that feels good somewhere deep in your soul.
Yes.
That's a hard thing to teach. Yeah.
Yeah. It's something that I don't think we necessarily teach, but when it happens, the students, and that's like with anything, like when something's really challenging, but you finally figure it out, it's so rewarding.
Absolutely.
And I think those are the moments that we have to remember.
It's fascinating because I've been thinking a lot about my role as a teacher, how it's changed over the last 10 years. And honestly, with technology, like there's no like tip or grammatical fact or vocabulary that I can provide you with that isn't easily found on the internet, like very quickly. So what am I here to do? What am I doing here? And I think it's like what you said, it's more of kind of a guide, almost therapeutic. I don't know how to define myself nowadays, kind of an identity crisis.
Yeah, but I think it's also like teaching people how to learn, like I get questions all the time, like, how do you say this? How do you say that? Like things that people could easily look up in Google or a dictionary or anything. And sometimes I'll tell them, like, here, if you go to this site or this blog or this, you can listen to the pronunciation, you can find the definition, you can see examples, you can see explanations. Because otherwise it kind of creates a dependency on the teacher to tell them everything. Or sometimes people just want your attention, or your personal feedback on a certain situation. But I do think the biggest gift that we can give is to teach people how to be independent, long-term in their language learning. Like maybe you have a really cool way to explain something that makes a lot of sense, and it's much simpler than going to this dictionary and trying to figure it out. But it's also good to say, like, in the future, you guys can go to this site or this podcast or this YouTube channel, and there's also some really good explanations that can help you. And then once people kind of figure that out, they realize that they can learn anything on their own. Anything. It just, you gotta want it bad enough,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, learning how to learn truly is kind of the meta skill that we all need to acquire. Do you have any recommendations for students? I find that a lot of our students fall in the category of like they're very motivated. You could even say they're passionate about learning English, but they're still running into a lot of roadblocks. They're getting stuck. They don't know exactly what to do. And it's not a lack of information. It's not a lack of motivation. It just seems like you're someone with a mindset of, okay, if we put some structure to this, we can make it happen. Can you deliver that in like a neat little package to a frustrated student?
Absolutely. So this frustrated student, I think everybody is this frustrated student, at least several times throughout their language learning journey. First, I think I would want to know what specifically is the frustration. For most people, it's speaking. I would say most people say, I understand, I can read, I can write, because at least I have the time to kind of think about it before I have to put it on paper. But speaking is tricky because there's a lot to think about. You're thinking about your pronunciation, sentence structure, verb conjugations, and there's a little bit of anxiety involved in it that you want to speak fast. You don't want to stop and think and stop and think. Usually, there's two things that I always tell people to help with your speaking. It's increase your input, listen more, because the more you listen, the bigger like your database of words and sentences and phrases and things like that is for you to pull from when it's time for you to speak.
Mm-hmm.
If we just study, that's okay. Like, we have to study too, but then you're more likely to have to stop and think. You have to go back and remember the rules, stop and remember the verb conjugation, stop and remember the pronunciation. But if you have a lot of input, you'll say things naturally because it sounds right. But if you don't have enough input, you don't know what sounds right. And I went through this exact same thing when I was learning Spanish and when I was learning Portuguese. I spent so much time studying, which was very helpful. Like, I knew how to speak correctly and conjugate the verbs correctly. And people were like, oh my goodness, you know how to use, all these fancy verb tenses. But I didn't feel fluent. I had to stop and think. And I froze a lot, and my anxiety went through the roof. But once I just increased my input and I just relaxed and just kind of let it all soak in, ideally listening to the same thing over and over and over again. So even like this interview in English, listen to it 100 times. I promise every single time you listen to it, there will be something new that you didn't hear the first 99 times, and you'll be reviewing stuff that you listened to that was also new. So increasing your input is incredibly, incredibly helpful. And it's not that hard to do. There's a lot of cool things that you can listen to for free on the internet. And very low stakes. Like, if you're just listening to something, there's no nervousness there. It can just be you and some headphones. Just sit back and relax. And the other thing is practice speaking. One thing that I really regret not doing, and this was also because when I started learning Portuguese, we did not have fancy iPhones. Like, I moved to Brazil and I had one of those like click phones with no internet on it.
A burner phone.
Yeah, pretty much. But if we just get in the habit of every single day grabbing your phone, hitting record, putting the date on it, and just speaking. No one has to listen to it, just you. It's just for you to have, so that you can go back and listen and realize, like, oh my goodness, I've really improved. And if you don't know where to start, if you're just learning, spit out words. Say the words that you know: red, cup, dog, cat. Describe the room you're in. Narrate what you do throughout the day. Talk about what you're worried about. It could be like a diary, an audio diary, whatever. It doesn't honestly matter what you talk about. It's just that physical practice of speaking is really, really helpful. Or even doing simple shadowing exercises, like people listening to this interview can pause and repeat. They could pause. People listening to this interview can pause and repeat, copying that same rhythm, that same intonation, the same everything, like an echo, but it just gets you practicing because it's also muscular, the position of your mouth and your tongue and things like that. The more you do it, the better prepared you will be. When someone comes and asks you a question in English, you'll be like, oh, I got this. I'm ready to go. But those two things I think are just so simple. They don't require any money, minimal effort. Just plug more input in, record yourself every day, and you will get over that plateau very quickly.
I think that was like the best advice. That's what I've been trying to say for 900 episodes. Essentially, if you listen to a lot of English and you record yourself every day, and I guess you could add a third component to this, what you said, which is repetition.
Yeah.
It's hard to exaggerate the importance of repetition. Like, I remember learning Spanish, I would listen to the same podcast, like the same 8-minute audio, literally like 50, 100 times. And when I suggest that to my students nowadays, they think I'm joking, but I'm like, no, seriously, now do that 1,000 times.
Yeah, it's so helpful. It's really helpful. And honestly, when you think about how kids learn, they do that. Kids, if I even like noticed with my children when they were, because I basically taught them English because they grew up in Brazil, I would say something and I could see them like repeating it in their heads. and repeating it out loud, and like several times throughout the day, repeating it over and over again. And we would watch the same movies like every single day. It was they wanted to watch the same movie, the same cartoon. And I was like, aren't you guys sick of this yet? But it was a really good review of all the words and phrases and everything.
It was really wonderful advice you gave.
Thank you.
Can I ask you one more language teaching related question? I think this is something that at least I know I struggle with in other parts of my life, but there's so much material that exists on the internet. It's really difficult for example, in the past 2 years, I've gotten really into meditation, which is very similar to learning a new language in like every way. But like, I can't tell you the number of meditation apps I've downloaded on my phone and deleted, and like YouTube videos and different podcasts about it. It's information overload.
Yes.
So I think the rules that you gave of listen a lot, record yourself, speak a lot, repeat, that works. How can people do that without getting overwhelmed with the quantity of stuff that exists?
I think that overwhelm happens anytime we learn something new. I mean, even for me, just learning how to create reels or color codes for posts on Instagram or anything that you decide you want to learn, because you don't know hardly anything, it's just super overwhelming. It's very, very overwhelming. I guess if people are trying to figure out like, well, what information should I listen to? There's a couple ways to kind of break that down. Is first, they really need to know their level. If you're starting out and you need that explanation in Portuguese, look for teachers who will teach using your native language. I am a big proponent of that at the beginning. Or even in the middle. Like sometimes it's very helpful just to hear a translation rather than hear some explanation in another language that you don't completely understand. And you're just like, oh my gosh, you lose your attention and your focus and you just begin to get frustrated.
I still do that nowadays. Like, Alexia, how would you say that in Portuguese? Okay, thanks.
Absolutely. There's certain things like your native language. And I think that's another myth that, I've tried to debunk, and I know some other people are talking about it now, but this thing of like, stop translating or stop thinking in your native language. It's literally impossible while you're learning. When you get to a point where you're very fluent in the language, you don't need to think in your native language anymore. Like you probably don't think in English anymore while you're speaking in Portuguese. Like I can speak in Portuguese without thinking in English, but it took a long time to get to this stage. And I spent many, many years thinking, okay, how do I want to say this in English? How can I say this in Portuguese, or a certain word or certain expression? And that's normal. When we fight ourselves on it or make ourselves feel bad, like, oh, I'm thinking in English again, or, oh, I'm thinking in Portuguese again, it just increases your anxiety and frustration and everything.
Yeah.
But I think for people that they don't know exactly what they're looking for, I think people need to get very, very clear about what their level is and specifically what it is that they're looking for. Because if you just say, I want to learn English, okay, well, that's so general and it doesn't tell me anything about you or what exactly you want to learn. So we have to really break it down ourselves, knowing, like for me, I like listening to Portuguese podcasts about, the whole like self-help, meditation, yoga. I listen to some that are kind of business interviews, but those don't really keep my attention as much as some of these other ones do.
Yeah. Do you have any recommendations?
Yeah.
Just asking for a friend.
Yeah. Okay. There's one, Acenda Sua Luz.
Sounds like something I would like. Amazing.
And then there's another yoga teacher, Mila Monteiro. Camomila is the name of her.
I like her
a lot.
I was going to try to copy these down. Then I realized we're recording this interview.
We're recording. But those two are probably my two favorites that I listen to a lot. But I listen to PrimoCast, Flowcast, like interview style podcasts as well that are pretty fun.
One I've really gotten into recently is autoconsciente.
I'll have to look at that one. Autoconsciente. Okay.
Yeah, it's like just
alta or auto?
Auto, like self-knowledge or self-conscious. Okay. So yeah, really well produced. Just every Sunday, a little bit of like dropping knowledge bombs about self-love. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. No, and it's a great way to just start your day. Like I think if you can do it first thing in the morning, you know, I'm sure people listen to your guys' podcasts. Hopefully, you know, they wake up in the morning while the girl, you know, doing their hair or makeup, brushing their teeth, drinking their coffee, driving to work. It's just a really nice way to start your day with something that's like uplifting and not stressful like the news.
Yeah.
Do not watch the news first thing in the morning.
Yeah. People that have listened to this podcast know that I'm a strong advocate of just cutting the news out of your life.
Yes.
And that will help your language skills.
Yeah.
And your general life outlook.
Yeah. But I think, like you said, I think, you know, to go back to your question of filtering out, I think people need to know really who they are and what they want. What's my level? What am I interested in? You know, what do I need specifically? Pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary. And then you can start, you know, niching it down and looking for specific channels. And unfortunately, you have to go through that filter process. Just like you said with the meditation apps, it helps to listen to recommendations from other people. But if something that we like or I like, it doesn't mean that everyone else is going to like it either. So you have to go through that filter process. There's been several podcasts that other people have recommended to me that I just didn't click with me. So I tried it and I'm like, this person kind of annoyed me, or I don't know, it just wasn't me. And that's okay. Then you just
totally
delete it and go on to the next one. But you have to be willing to go through that filtering process. It's just like with anything.
Yeah.
It's like
I think
dating.
It's a lot like dating. There we go. You took the words out of my mouth. So I know, at least personally, a lot of our students get hung up on like, what's my level? Like, can you tell me what my level is? Is it like B2 intermediate? And I normally try to turn them away from that. But I do think it's really, really important to know where you are, where you're going,
Right.
like what material is going to be good for you. Do you think that there's a way that students can do that without having a teacher tell them, like, okay, you are a B2 student, so you need this book?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, honestly, when I was learning Portuguese, I never even formally studied it. Like I took lessons for a year in Chicago before I came to Brazil. And then I never took classes again. I just kind of learned on my own. And I never once thought about like, what level am I? Am I a B2, C1, A2? Because that really doesn't matter unless you're trying to get a certain job and they want to know specifically what level you have. But most of the time in those cases, they want you to take a proficiency test anyways, in which you'll take like a Cambridge IELTS or TOEFL exam. So I think some people are a little bit more, I don't know, systematic maybe with their studies, and they like to know how many numbers and levels and all that stuff. I'm definitely not that way. And I take it you're not that way either.
No. But
I think what's more important than saying you're B2 or C1 is knowing what you're good at. Like I'm really, my listening comprehension is great. I understand like 95% of what I hear. And also knowing what you need to improve on. However, my vocabulary is lacking, especially in these situations. You know, the hospital, I had to go to the hospital and I didn't know how to say anything because I don't know, you know, the names of the organs, or I had to buy paint and I don't know any of the names of these items that I need to paint my house. So we have to kind of just ask ourselves a lot of questions. And ideally, if it's things that you actually need in real life, they end up being more important and we're more motivated to learn them. Like if someone gives me a list of vocabulary about like car parts, I don't care about cars. Like I don't know. Yeah. I don't even know the names of these things in English. I a mechanic. It has it doesn't interest me at all. Like, I'm not going to waste my time learning this vocabulary when maybe I'm having a baby and I want to plan a baby shower. I'd so much rather learn terms like bottle and diaper and stroller than, I think we have to ask ourselves, and people tend to ask others before they ask themselves, like everything. What do you think about this dress? What do you think about my haircut? What do you think about my boyfriend? I'm like, who cares what I think? What do you think? And that's what we're in a society where everyone is being told what to think all the time. It's like this excess of information. You need to think like this. You need to believe this. You need to do that. It's like, no. Stop that. Like, if anybody's telling you how to think, cut them out of your life, because that's not the type of person you want around. Like, you need to trust yourself and ask yourself, what do I need? What do I want? And then start there, and then start looking for that information. But
yeah, 100%. I always think about when people 50 years ago still learned foreign languages with much less high-tech information.
Yeah, without apps and flashcards and automatic, people ask, they truly believe that it's impossible to learn a language without Duolingo or Anki or these spaced repetition apps. I'm like, I never used any of that. And like you said, years ago, there's a lot of people who learned just by playing, listening to music or whatever it was. There's a million ways to learn. And we have to figure out what ways work for us the best. And that's very simple.
Yeah. I think your paradigm of enjoying the process, that's something that changes over time. Something that at least a lot of students I've worked with maybe don't recognize. Learning a new language is there's no end date. It's a lifelong project, quite literally. You're going to do it until you die.
Right.
So you have to figure out different ways to keep it interesting and different ways to make it applicable to your life. And it just never stops. So people should go in clear-headed about that. It's quite a big thing to tackle.
And I think that's the cool thing about it. The more you learn, the more you realize oh my gosh, there's so much more that I need to know. People who think they know everything are actually the people who know the least. And I mean, but this also applies with anything that you want to be really good at. There's no end. There's never all right, I speak English, now I can stop. And if you do stop, you're going to lose it for sure. There's a saying that says, there's no such thing as staying the same. You're either improving or you're getting worse. So people who think, I'm just staying the same, chances are you're actually declining a little bit. Unless you're actively trying to improve, you're going to do the opposite. So no one has to freak out or do anything drastic, but you have to try to improve just a little bit every single day. And that's the fun part of it. If you feel like there's nothing left for you to learn, that's kind of boring, right?
Yeah, that was one of going back to your list of self-help books, you mentioned Atomic Habits, I believe.
Yes.
Which is a book we've talked about on the show. I'm sure we have at some point. But the idea of just incrementally improving, I think he says 1% per day, which is a lot. But if you can just shake things up and try to get a little bit better each day, that compounds. And
totally
over time, that turns into a really interesting life of crazy experiences and beautiful relationships.
Yeah. And that's really how anything is built. Nothing goes from A to Z. It's just the accumulation of little things. And what I love about the Atomic Habits and thinking about 1% is it's very doable. So many people get overwhelmed. They think they have to move abroad or do something super intensive, which is fine. Those are all great things, but it's hard to maintain that. It's if you want to get fit and go to the, if you start running 15 miles a day, sure, maybe you'll be able to do it for a short period of time, but you're going to get burnt out. You're going to get tired. You're not going to have time. But if you just focus on just a little bit each day, you can maintain that forever, easily. It just becomes part of your routine. And there's not so much resistance when you're trying to achieve your goals.
Absolutely. I think I can tie that in full circle to where we began this conversation and into both of our stories. In both of our cases, we did kind of have to do something drastic to get the journey started. We both kind of randomly moved to Brazil. But what kept us on this journey, in your case, marrying a Brazilian, in my case, my partner is a Brazilian as well. And that's like the motivation that keeps me just being with Alexia. I don't know. There's this idea of meditation of like freedom from freedom. So like too much freedom at some point can be really hard to manage. So
yes,
once you get the ball rolling, then you're just playing the game. I know that's a very abstract concept, and I doubt many of our students will follow it, but I think it's important.
Though. Yeah. And it's so funny you even mentioned freedom, because I know for me, before we started the whole online thing, that was something that was like a really big personal goal. Like we had our school, which I loved. It was a wonderful experience. But when you have a physical business, you can't really move. You can't really travel or do whatever it is you want to do, because you're kind of locked in there.
Mm-hmm. And you had a physical school in Campinas.
In Campinas. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. And working on the internet, you have the freedom to go wherever you want. As long as there's an internet connection, you can work, you can live, you can do whatever it is you need to do. But with that comes that like excessive freedom. Like, oh my gosh, I have all these options. Where am I going to go? What am I going to do? And we felt that way when we sold our school and we moved online. We didn't know where we were going to live. We were like all over the map, and it was very stressful, and it almost felt like worse, and you have to decide, okay, this is my choice. I'm going to make it. And then I remember thinking, well, maybe I don't want freedom because this is like overwhelming and it doesn't feel good. But then the other day I was talking to another woman that I learned so much from, and she was actually, freedom is the ability to choose again, is being free from all those negative thoughts of this is overwhelming, this is too much. It's just basically, if I make a mistake, I can choose again. Or if this doesn't work out, there'll be something else there for me, and then just kind of, it's like basically freeing yourself from, maybe I'm making a bad mistake, or maybe this is the wrong decision for me. So yeah, there's a lot that comes with freedom. But I think what people think is just like, I want to be able to do whatever I want. Well, when that happens, it's actually not as cool as it sounds.
Yeah, but it gets you into a pretty like anarchist, nihilist place of mind pretty quickly.
Yes, it's pretty horrible, actually. You don't feel really good about yourself. But then when you choose, like if you choose, okay, this is my choice and I'm going to make the best of it. And if I realize this is not a good choice, I have the freedom to choose again. Like that, to me, like makes me feel a lot better. But it's still tricky.
It's tricky, but that was beautiful. Okay, Jackie, I want to be mindful of your time, and I want to somehow finish this kind of winding philosophical conversation that we've had on a language note. If you could give some sort of recommendation about, like you just said, that you have to make a choice, and you have that freedom to make a choice. I think most people that listen to our podcast, it's in English, so they can understand English, but they're frustrated somewhere along the learning curve. What kind of, I don't know if it's a recommendation, a quote, an idea, a routine, but what's something that you would offer just to kind of push people to get them out of that kind of frustrated, stagnated feeling?
a quote that I always think of is what you believe is what you achieve. And I think it's normal. First, we should never beat ourselves up or feel bad or feel guilty for being frustrated or feeling down or having these thoughts like, oh, I'm never going to learn this. Like, we all do that. That's okay. But just let it go and try to replace that with something that helps you more. Try to think about something that you can do. Celebrate a small victory that you've had. Think about the progress that you've made. Just like be nice to yourself. A lot of times the things that we say to ourselves are pretty horrible. So we have to just be nice to ourselves, encourage ourselves, congratulate ourselves, celebrate. Like maybe you don't know a lot of English at all, but you're learning, that's fantastic. Like nobody starts out. We tend to compare ourselves with someone who's like on chapter 10 and we're on chapter 1 still, which is never a good idea. It just makes us feel bad. But just really celebrate the journey and do that visualization, like really think about yourself in a positive situation, being successful, doing whatever it is you want to do, something simple. It could be helping a person in line at the bank, translating for them or giving them directions or I don't know, anything, all those little things, they make you feel. And it's not just seeing it, but it's like feeling that comes along with it. I know that has been tremendously helpful for me in so many ways. It's not just visualizing this like distant picture. It's like being it, feeling it, incorporating it. And that feeling will lift you up and pull you through. But yeah, I think that would be my advice to anybody who's going through a hard time with anything.
That's absolutely beautiful.
It's pretty simple.
Language is such an embodied, like emotional process. So you got to feel it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to add to that because you said it much better than I can. But thank you very much for coming on the show, Jackie.
Thank you.
Where can people find you? I think it's quite easy, but if they want to learn more about you, watch your videos, where can people find more of you?
Well, I do have a website that's www.askjackie, JACKIE. A lot of people write Ask Jack. AskJackie.com.br.
Jackie. Okay, that makes sense.
With the IE at the end. Or YouTube. I'm Ask Jackie on YouTube. Instagram, I'm Ask Jackie BR. But I think if anybody types in Ask Jackie, it will come up. But yeah, Facebook, I have a Telegram group as well. But mostly YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all those places.
Yeah, I searched for Ask Jackie this morning, and it was quite easy to find a lot of.
There's a lot of stuff that pop up. It's pretty scary.
Well, thanks a lot, Jackie. It was a pleasure having you on, and hopefully we can do it again sometime in the future.
I'd love to. That'd be great.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you.